Navy SEALs Story Part 1. Sarah Martinez had always been smaller than her peers, but what she lacked in size, she made up for in determination. At 22, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with calloused hands that spoke of years spent climbing ropes and lifting weights that seemed too heavy for her frame. The daughter of a single mother who worked double shifts at a diner in small-town Texas, Sarah had learned early that life rarely handed out participation trophies. The Naval Academy had been her ticket out, her chance to prove that excellence wasn't measured in inches or pounds. For 4 years, she had pushed herself harder than anyone around her, graduating in the top 10% of her class while maintaining perfect scores in physical fitness tests. Her instructors noted her unusual combination of analytical thinking and raw physical courage, qualities that made her an ideal candidate for the most elite military training programs. When the opportunity to attempt Navy SEAL training presented itself, Sarah didn't hesitate. She knew the statistics were brutal. Less than 25% of candidates completed the program, and she would be among the first women ever to attempt it. The odds were stacked against her in ways that went far beyond the already impossible standards of SEAL training. The basic underwater demolition SEAL training facility in California looked like a cross between a military base and a medieval torture chamber. Obstacle courses stretched across sandy fields, their wooden structures weathered by salt air, and the sweat of thousands of hopeful candidates who had either succeeded or failed spectacularly. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beyond the base, its cold waters waiting to test every aspect of human endurance. Sarah arrived on a Monday morning in September, carrying a single duffel bag and wearing the standard-issue training uniform that hung slightly loose on her compact frame. She had spent the previous 3 months preparing specifically for this moment, running miles along Texas back roads before dawn and practicing underwater breath-holding in the local community pool until the lifeguards knew her by name. The other candidates were exactly what she had expected: tall, broad-shouldered men who looked like they had been carved from granite and raised on protein shakes. They moved with the easy confidence of people who had never seriously doubted their physical capabilities. Some were fresh from other elite military units, while others came straight from college athletics programs where they had dominated their respective sports. Stood 6 feet 3 inches and had played Division I football before joining the Navy. His massive hands could palm a basketball, and he carried himself with the swagger of someone who had never met a physical challenge he couldn't overwhelm with pure strength. During the initial meet-and-greet session, he made a point of introducing himself to every candidate except Sarah, whom he seemed to regard as some kind of administrative error that would be corrected within a few days. Jake was built like a marathon runner but possessed the explosive power of a sprinter. He had completed 2 tours with Marine Force reconnaissance and spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had already proven himself in combat situations. Jake acknowledged Sarah's presence, but his polite nods carried an undertone of skepticism that was somehow more insulting than outright dismissal. The third member of what would become an unlikely trio was David, a former college swimmer whose lean build concealed surprising strength. He had grown up in San Francisco's Chinatown, where his parents ran a small restaurant, and he carried himself with the methodical precision of someone who had learned to maximize efficiency in everything he did. David was the only candidate who seemed genuinely curious about Sarah's presence rather than immediately dismissive. Instructor Chief Petty Officer ran the initial orientation with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had delivered the same speech hundreds of times. He was a compact man in his 40s, whose every movement suggested coiled energy waiting to be unleashed. Multiple deployments had left their mark in the form of small scars and a permanently serious expression that never quite relaxed, even when he smiled. "Ladies and," began, his voice carrying easily across the assembled candidates without any apparent effort, "welcome to the most demanding military training program in the world. Over the next 6 months, you will be tested in ways that most human beings cannot imagine. You will discover muscles you didn't know you had, and then you will discover new ways to make those muscles scream for mercy." He paced slowly in front of the group, making eye contact with each candidate as he spoke. When his gaze reached Sarah, it lingered for just a moment longer than the others, but his expression revealed nothing about his thoughts. "Some of you are here because you want to serve your country at the highest level," continued. "Others are here because you want to prove something to yourselves or to people who doubted you. A few of you are probably here because you thought it would look good on your resume or impress people at parties. None of those motivations matter now." The only thing that matters is whether you can meet the standards we set, day after day, week after week, until this program either makes you into something extraordinary or breaks you completely. The first week was designed to establish baseline fitness levels and begin the psychological pressure that would intensify throughout the program. Candidates were awakened at 4:30 each morning by air horns and expected to be dressed and in formation within 2 minutes. The daily schedule included 6-mile runs on soft sand, obstacle course trials, swimming tests in full gear, and calisthenics sessions that seemed to last forever. Sarah quickly discovered that her smaller size offered certain advantages. She could navigate tight spaces in obstacle courses more easily than larger candidates, and her lower body weight made some climbing exercises less demanding. However, these benefits were more than offset by challenges that pure determination couldn't overcome. Carrying heavy equipment during beach runs was proportionally more difficult for her, and she struggled to keep pace with longer-legged runners on flat terrain. The psychological pressure was relentless. Instructors seemed to appear from nowhere to question every decision, critique every movement, and demand explanations for choices that had seemed perfectly reasonable moments before. They specialized in creating situations where there were no obviously correct answers, then criticizing candidates for their responses regardless of what those responses were. "Martinez," Instructor Petty Officer Williams shouted during a particularly brutal obstacle course session. "Why are you moving so slowly? Do you think enemy bullets are going to wait for you to catch your breath?" Sarah was hanging from monkey bars, her arms burning with fatigue as she tried to maintain forward momentum. Sweat dripped into her eyes, making it difficult to see the next handhold clearly. "No, Instructor Williams," she managed between gritted teeth. "Then move faster," Williams bellowed. "Or maybe you think special operations is supposed to be easy. Maybe you think we should lower our standards to accommodate your limitations." The question was designed to be a trap. Agreeing would suggest she expected special treatment, while disagreeing would imply the training wasn't challenging enough. Sarah chose a third option, channeling her energy into completing the obstacle without responding verbally. She reached the end of the monkey bars and dropped to the sand, immediately beginning the required push-ups without pause. Williams followed her, continuing his verbal assault. "I didn't hear an answer, candidate. Are you too tired to speak, or do you just not have anything intelligent to say?" "I'm here to meet the same standards as everyone else, Instructor Williams," Sarah replied while maintaining perfect push-up form. "No higher, no lower." The instructor studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he moved on to the next candidate, leaving Sarah to wonder whether her response had been appropriate or had simply delayed inevitable criticism. The physical demands escalated quickly. What had seemed impossible during the first week became routine by the third, only to be replaced by new challenges that pushed the boundaries of human endurance even further. Candidates learned to function on 3 hours of sleep, to maintain focus while experiencing mild hypothermia, and to continue problem-solving when their bodies screamed for rest. Sarah's compact build, which had initially seemed like a disadvantage, began to reveal unexpected benefits. Her lower center of gravity made her more stable during boat operations in rough surf, and her smaller caloric requirements meant she could function longer on limited rations. Most importantly, her determination to prove herself drove her to develop techniques and strategies that larger candidates simply powered through with brute force. During a particularly challenging log-carrying exercise, where teams of candidates were required to transport telephone pole-sized logs across miles of beach terrain, Sarah found herself grouped with Jake and David. The log weighed several hundred pounds and required careful coordination to move efficiently. Naturally assumed leadership, positioning himself at the front and setting a pace that played to his strengths. "Slow it down," Jake called after the first quarter mile. "We've got 3 more miles to go, and some of us aren't built like freight trains." Glanced back, his eyes focusing on Sarah, who was struggling to maintain the rapid pace while supporting her share of the log's weight. "Maybe some people should have thought about that before signing up for SEAL training," he replied, but he did reduce the pace slightly. David, positioned next to Sarah, noticed her technique and quietly offered suggestions. "Try shifting your grip every few minutes," he murmured during a brief rest stop. "It distributes the stress differently and helps prevent cramping." Sarah nodded gratefully, too focused on conserving energy for conversation. She had already discovered that David possessed an engineer's mind for optimization, constantly analyzing problems and developing more efficient solutions. His advice proved valuable, and she was able to maintain her position for the remainder of the exercise. The log-carrying exercise became a metaphor for the entire SEAL training experience. Individual strength mattered, but success ultimately depended on teamwork, strategy, and the ability to support teammates when they needed help. Candidates who tried to dominate through pure physical power often burned out, while those who focused on efficiency and mutual support were more likely to endure. As weeks passed, the initial group of candidates began to shrink. Some left due to injuries, others simply decided the program wasn't worth the physical and psychological cost, and a few were dismissed for failing to meet minimum standards. The pressure was designed to reveal character under extreme stress, separating those who could adapt and overcome from those who would break when their limits were reached. Sarah watched several promising candidates leave, each departure serving as a reminder of how precarious her own position remained. She had survived the initial culling, but the most demanding phases of training still lay ahead. Hell Week loomed in the distance like a storm system visible on the horizon, its reputation for breaking even the strongest candidates well established through decades of SEAL folklore. The camaraderie among remaining candidates deepened as shared suffering created bonds that transcended initial prejudices. Began to acknowledge Sarah's contributions during team exercises, while Jake started offering tactical insights that helped her improve her performance. David continued to share technical knowledge that benefited the entire group, creating an informal support network that strengthened all of them. Instructors watched these developments with professional interest. They understood that building cohesive teams was as important as testing individual limits, and they designed exercises specifically to encourage cooperation while maintaining competitive pressure. The best SEAL candidates were those who could maintain their own standards while helping teammates achieve theirs, a balance that required both personal strength and emotional intelligence. Sarah found herself settling into a rhythm that worked for her unique combination of strengths and limitations. She couldn't outrun the fastest candidates or the strongest, but she could outlast many of them and contribute specialized skills that proved valuable during complex problem-solving exercises. Her background in engineering mathematics helped during navigation challenges, while her experience with limited resources from her childhood made her particularly effective during survival exercises. The obstacle courses became less intimidating as her technique improved and her confidence grew. She learned to use momentum and leverage to compensate for her size disadvantage, developing approaches that sometimes proved more efficient than the brute force methods favored by larger candidates. Instructors began using her as an example during technique demonstrations, a recognition that felt more valuable than any formal commendation. Combat training introduced new dimensions to the program. Candidates learned weapons handling, tactical movement, and hand-to-hand combat techniques designed for situations where superior numbers or equipment weren't available. The fighting systems taught were practical and brutal, focused on ending conflicts quickly rather than following sporting conventions. Sarah approached combat training with the same analytical mindset she applied to other challenges. She studied leverage points and pressure techniques that could neutralize larger opponents, recognizing that her survival in real combat situations would depend on skill and strategy rather than raw power. Her instructors noticed her methodical approach and began providing additional technical instruction that helped her develop into a surprisingly effective fighter. The first serious test of her combat skills came during a training exercise designed to simulate prisoner escape scenarios. Candidates were placed in stress positions, subjected to psychological pressure, and then required to demonstrate their ability to fight their way out of captivity. The exercise was designed to be realistic enough to provide meaningful training while remaining within safety boundaries. Sarah found herself paired against during the final phase of the exercise. He outweighed her by nearly 100 pounds and possessed reach advantages that seemed insurmountable. However, the exercise parameters required her to demonstrate specific techniques rather than simply survive, and she had spent weeks preparing for exactly this type of challenge. The confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds. Sarah used size and momentum against him, employing leverage techniques that turned his strength into a disadvantage. When the dust settled, he was on the ground and she was standing over him, both of them breathing hard and covered in sand from the training area. looked up at her with an expression of genuine surprise and growing respect. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. "Same place you learned to carry heavy logs," Sarah replied, extending a hand to help him to his feet. "Right here." The incident marked a turning point in how other candidates perceived her capabilities. Word spread quickly through the remaining group that Sarah Martinez was not just surviving SEAL training, but actually excelling in specific areas. The transformation from novelty to respected teammate was subtle but unmistakable, and it changed the entire dynamic of her training experience. Instructors had been watching these developments carefully. Chief had seen promising candidates fail due to social isolation as often as physical limitations, and he understood that team dynamics could make or break individual candidates. Sarah's integration into the group was a positive indicator, but he knew that the most challenging phases of training still lay ahead. The weeks leading up to Hell Week were designed to prepare candidates physically and mentally for the ultimate test of their commitment and capabilities. Training intensity increased gradually, with longer exercises, less sleep, and more complex scenarios that required sustained performance under stress. Candidates learned to function while experiencing various forms of deprivation, from limited food and water to extended periods without rest. Sarah's preparation for Hell Week involved more than just physical conditioning. She spent extra time studying the technical aspects of SEAL operations, memorizing procedures and protocols that would be tested under extreme stress. She also worked on developing mental techniques for maintaining focus and making decisions when her body was beyond the point of exhaustion. The night before Hell Week officially began, candidates were given a final briefing on what to expect. Chief stood before the remaining group, which had shrunk from the original class to fewer than half its starting size. His expression was more serious than usual as he prepared to explain what would happen over the next 5 days. "And lady," he began, nodding toward Sarah, "tomorrow you begin the most challenging week of your military careers. Hell Week is designed to simulate the stress of extended combat operations while testing your ability to function as a team under impossible conditions. Some of you will discover reserves of strength you didn't know you possessed. Others will discover that those reserves have limits." He paused, scanning the faces of candidates who had already endured months of intensive training. "The most important thing to remember is that Hell Week is not designed to break you. It's designed to reveal who you really are when everything else is stripped away. Your performance over the next 5 days will determine not just whether you continue in this program, but whether you have the character necessary to serve in special operations." Sarah listened to these words while mentally reviewing her preparation and strategy for the coming ordeal. She had studied accounts of previous Hell Weeks, analyzed the types of challenges typically presented, and developed contingency plans for various scenarios. However, she also understood that no amount of preparation could fully prepare someone for the reality of sustained stress and sleep deprivation. The final hours before Hell Week began were spent in nervous anticipation and last-minute preparation. Candidates checked and rechecked their gear, consumed final meals that would have to sustain them through extended periods of limited nutrition, and tried to grab whatever rest they could before the madness officially began. As Sarah lay on her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling and listening to the nervous movements of other candidates, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months earlier, she had been a newly commissioned officer with something to prove. Now she was hours away from the ultimate test of everything she believed about herself and her capabilities. The transformation hadn't been just physical, although months of intensive training had made her stronger and more capable than she had ever imagined possible. The real change had been psychological and emotional, as she had learned to push past perceived limitations and discover reserves of determination that could carry her through seemingly impossible situations. Tomorrow would test not just her individual capabilities, but her ability to function as part of a team under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The bonds she had formed with other candidates would be tested along with her physical and mental endurance, and the outcome would determine whether she had earned the right to continue pursuing her goal of becoming a Navy SEAL. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by anticipation and the knowledge that in a few hours everything would change. Hell Week would either confirm that she belonged among the elite forces of the United States Navy, or it would reveal that despite all her preparation and determination, some barriers were simply insurmountable. The alarm that would signal the beginning of Hell Week was still hours away, But Sarah Martinez was already mentally preparing for the most important test of her life. Navy SEAL Story Part 2. The air horns began blaring at midnight, cutting through the California darkness like mechanical banshees announcing the beginning of Hell Week. Sarah jolted awake instantly, muscle memory from months of training overriding the disorientation of sudden awakening. Around her, other candidates scrambled to their feet, grabbing gear and racing toward the assembly area where instructors waited with expressions of barely contained anticipation. "Move, move, move," Instructor Williams shouted, his voice carrying an edge of excitement that hadn't been present during regular training sessions. "You have 60 seconds to be in formation, fully dressed with complete gear. Anyone who isn't ready becomes everyone's problem." Sarah pulled on her boots with practiced efficiency, her movements automatic after countless early morning drills. The familiar weight of her equipment felt reassuring as she secured her pack and checked her weapons. Around her, the remaining candidates moved with similar urgency, their faces reflecting a mixture of determination and barely controlled anxiety. Hell Week had officially begun. The first challenge came before dawn, as candidates found themselves standing chest-deep in the frigid Pacific Ocean while instructors shouted orders from the beach. The water temperature was brutal, hovering just above 50 degrees and designed to test their ability to function while experiencing the early stages of hypothermia. Waves crashed over their heads as they performed calisthenics in formation, salt water stinging their eyes and making every movement more difficult. "Martinez," Chief called from the shore, "you look cold. Are you sure you're tough enough for this?" Sarah's teeth were chattering so violently she could barely speak, but she managed to shout back, "Chief," while continuing to perform jumping jacks in the churning surf. The cold was beyond anything she had experienced during training, penetrating to her bones and making her muscles feel sluggish and unresponsive. Beside her was faring no better despite his size advantage. His lips had turned blue, and she could see him struggling to maintain coordination as the cold affected his motor functions. David and Jake were equally miserable, but all four had learned to draw strength from shared suffering during the previous months of training. The ocean evolution lasted 3 hours, with candidates moving between different exercises while instructors maintained constant pressure through shouted criticism and impossible demands. By the time they were finally allowed to return to shore, several candidates were showing signs of serious hypothermia and had to be pulled from the exercise for medical evaluation. Sarah's small frame, which had been a disadvantage in many previous exercises, proved beneficial in the cold water. Her lower surface area to body mass ratio helped her retain heat more effectively than larger candidates, and she was still functional when some of the biggest men in the class were struggling with coordination and decision-making. The transition from water to land brought no relief. Candidates were immediately ordered to low crawl across a quarter-mile of rocky beach terrain while carrying full gear, their wet clothing providing no protection against the sharp stones and debris. The crawl was designed to test their willingness to endure pain for extended periods while maintaining focus on tactical objectives. Sarah's knees and elbows were bleeding by the halfway point, but she maintained her position in formation while concentrating on technique and breathing. The rocks seemed to find every vulnerable spot on her body, and her wet clothing chafed against abraded skin with each movement. Behind her, she could hear muttering creative obscenities under his breath, a sure sign that he was maintaining his fighting spirit despite the discomfort. The first day of Hell Week continued with a brutal series of physical challenges designed to test every aspect of their conditioning. Boat crews were formed, and candidates learned to work together while carrying heavy rubber rafts across miles of soft sand. The boats weighed several hundred pounds when dry and became even heavier when loaded with required equipment and soaked with seawater. Sarah found herself assigned to Boat Crew 2 along with Jake, David, and 2 other candidates named and Williams. The crew dynamic would be crucial for their success during Hell Week, as all 6 men would have to coordinate their efforts while dealing with sleep deprivation, physical exhaustion, and constant pressure from instructors. Naturally emerged as the crew leader, his combination of size and leadership experience making him the obvious choice for the role. However, he had learned to value input from other crew members during the previous months of training, and he began incorporating Sarah's analytical approach into their tactical planning. "Martinez, you're good with the technical stuff," he said during a brief rest between boat races. What's the most efficient way to navigate that obstacle course while carrying the boat? Sarah studied the course layout, noting the sequence of barriers and calculating optimal paths for their crew's capabilities. If we take the left approach and use height advantage for the high obstacles, we can maintain momentum better than trying to power through the direct route, she suggested. The strategy proved effective, and Boat Crew 2 finished the evolution in second place despite being one of the smaller teams. Their success caught the attention of instructors, who began subjecting them to additional scrutiny and more challenging scenarios designed to test their coordination under pressure. Sleep became a luxury measured in minutes rather than hours. Candidates were allowed brief rest periods between evolutions, but these were frequently interrupted by surprise exercises or equipment inspections. Sarah learned to fall asleep instantly whenever the opportunity arose, even if it meant dozing while standing in formation or during brief tactical planning sessions. The sleep deprivation created a surreal quality to the training that made simple tasks feel impossibly complex. During one navigation exercise, Sarah found herself staring at a compass for several minutes while trying to remember how to calculate a basic bearing. Her brain felt wrapped in cotton, and information that should have been automatic required tremendous concentration to access. "Stay focused, Martinez," David whispered during a brief moment when instructors weren't paying attention to their crew. "Remember the sequence we practiced, bearing first, then distance, then landmarks." The reminder helped cut through the mental fog, and Sarah was able to complete the navigation successfully. The incident highlighted how crucial crew coordination had become, as individual capabilities were degraded by extreme stress and fatigue. By the second day of Hell Week, the constant pressure and physical demands were taking their toll on all candidates. Several members of the original class had already dropped out, their decisions to quit announced by the distinctive sound of brass bells ringing near the medical station. Each ring represented another candidate who had reached his personal breaking point and chosen to end his participation in SEAL training. Sarah's crew had developed an effective rhythm that played to each member's strengths while compensating for individual weaknesses, provided leadership and raw power during physically demanding evolutions. Jake contributed tactical expertise and maintained situational awareness when others were too exhausted to think clearly. David solved technical problems and optimized their approaches to complex challenges. And Williams served as reliable workhorses who could be counted on to execute plans without questioning or hesitation. Sarah's role had evolved into something resembling a combat engineer, analyzing problems and developing solutions that the crew could implement effectively. Her ability to maintain analytical thinking while experiencing extreme stress proved invaluable during scenarios that required quick decision-making under pressure. The infamous Log PT evolution tested their crew coordination to its limits. Teams were required to perform synchronized calisthenics while supporting telephone pole-sized logs above their heads. The logs weighed hundreds of pounds and required perfect timing to move safely. A single crew member losing focus or coordination could result in serious injuries to the entire team. "On my count," called as Boat Crew 2 prepared to press their log overhead for the 50th repetition. 1, 2, 3, up. 6 pairs of arms strained against the massive weight, muscles trembling with fatigue as they held the log in position. Sarah's arms felt like they were on fire, but she maintained her grip and matched the timing of her crewmates. The alternative was potentially catastrophic for everyone involved. "Hold it," Instructor Williams shouted from nearby. "I want to see perfect alignment. Martinez, get your end up higher." Sarah summoned reserves of strength she didn't know still existed, raising her portion of the log until it matched the level maintained by her taller crewmates. Sweat dripped into her eyes, and her shoulders screamed in protest, but she held position until the instructor finally allowed them to lower the weight. The log PT evolution continued for 2 hours, testing not just their physical strength, but their ability to function as a coordinated unit under extreme duress. By the end, all 6 crew members were barely standing, but they had completed every repetition without dropping the log or compromising safety. Combat training during Hell Week introduced new levels of realism and complexity. Candidates faced scenarios designed to simulate actual special operations missions, complete with time pressure, incomplete information, and hostile opposition. The exercises required them to apply months of technical training while dealing with sleep deprivation and physical exhaustion that degraded their decision-making capabilities. During one particularly challenging scenario, Boat Crew 2 was tasked with infiltrating a mock enemy compound, gathering intelligence, and extracting without being detected. The exercise area was populated with role players who served as hostile forces, and candidates who were captured faced additional stress positions and interrogation designed to test their resistance to pressure. Sarah found herself serving as the crew's primary reconnaissance specialist, her small size allowing her to move through the mock compound with minimal risk of detection. She gathered crucial intelligence about guard positions and patrol patterns that allowed her crew to plan an effective approach to their objective. The mission required precise timing and flawless execution. Sarah's technical analysis had identified a 15-minute window when shift changes would create a gap in the defensive perimeter, but the crew would have to move quickly and quietly to take advantage of the opportunity. "Remember, we go in pairs," whispered as the crew prepared to begin their infiltration. "Martinez and I take the primary route, Jake and David cover the secondary approach, and Williams maintain overwatch from the rally point." The plan worked perfectly for the first 10 minutes. Sarah and reached their objective and began photographing documents that represented critical intelligence. However, an unexpected patrol change threatened to expose their position just as they were preparing to exfiltrate. Sarah recognized the problem first, her analytical mind quickly calculating the timing and realizing they would be caught in the open if they attempted to follow their planned escape route. She made a split-second decision to deviate from the mission plan, leading through an alternative path that avoided the patrol but required them to navigate more dangerous terrain. The modified route took them through a section of the compound that was supposed to be off-limits due to unstable structures and debris fields. However, Sarah's assessment had identified it as their only viable option for avoiding capture, and she was confident they could navigate safely if they were careful and methodical. The escape was successful, and Boat Crew 2 completed their mission without any members being captured or compromised. Their performance earned recognition from instructors and demonstrated the effectiveness of their coordination and individual contributions. However, success in one evolution only meant that the next challenge would be more demanding. Hell Week was designed to escalate continuously, pushing candidates beyond what they believed were their absolute limits, and then requiring them to function at even higher levels. The third day brought the Around the World evolution, a notorious challenge that required boat crews to navigate a course that circumnavigated the entire training facility. The route covered more than 20 miles of varied terrain, including rocky coastlines, muddy tidal zones, and open ocean passages where large waves threatened to swamp the boats. Boat Crew 2 launched before dawn, their rubber craft loaded with required gear and supplies for what was expected to be a 12-hour evolution. The early portion of the route followed familiar coastline, but conditions deteriorated rapidly as they moved into more exposed waters where Pacific swells tested their boat handling skills. Sarah's position in the bow required her to call out obstacles and navigate the crew through dangerous waters while maintaining their heading toward designated checkpoints. The physical demands were brutal, with all 6 crew members paddling continuously against strong currents and headwinds that seemed determined to push them off course. "Rock formation at 2 o'clock, Sarah called over the sound of crashing waves. "We need to bear left to avoid the shallow water." Adjusted their heading while the rest of the crew maintained their paddling rhythm, their boat cutting through swells that sometimes obscured their view of other crews and support vessels. The cold spray was relentless, soaking through their gear and making every movement more difficult as their clothing became waterlogged. The middle section of the route took them through a tidal estuary where shifting currents and submerged obstacles created constantly changing navigation challenges. Sarah's ability to read water conditions and anticipate problems proved crucial as they threaded their way between mudflats and hidden rocks that could damage their boat or strand them in areas where rescue would be difficult. "There's a channel marker ahead," she announced, pointing toward a barely visible post that marked deeper water. "If we can reach it, we'll have clear passage for the next mile." The crew adjusted their course and increased their paddling intensity, racing against tide changes that could leave them stranded in shallow water. Their timing was perfect, and they reached the channel marker just as the tide began to turn in their favor. The final section of the Around the World evolution tested their endurance as much as their navigation skills. Open ocean swells made paddling more difficult, and the distance between checkpoints meant they had to maintain their pace for extended periods without rest. Sarah's arms felt like lead weights, and she could see similar exhaustion in the faces of her crew mates, but they continued to function as a coordinated unit. Boat Crew 2 completed the evolution in 4th place overall, a respectable performance that reflected their effective teamwork and navigation. However, the achievement came at a cost, as all 6 crew members were showing signs of serious fatigue and minor injuries that would accumulate throughout the remaining days of Hell Week. The 4th day introduced psychological warfare designed to test their mental resilience and commitment to the program. Instructors employed sleep deprivation, sensory overload, and deliberate confusion to create stress levels that went beyond physical challenges. Candidates found themselves questioning their own perceptions and struggling to maintain focus on basic tasks that should have been routine. During one particularly disorienting exercise, candidates were placed in stress positions while instructors subjected them to loud music, flashing lights, and contradictory orders designed to break their concentration and test their ability to follow commands under extreme duress. The exercise continued for hours, with instructors rotating through different psychological pressure techniques. Sarah found herself standing in a stress position with her arms extended overhead, while speakers blasted noise that made communication difficult. Instructors shouted conflicting orders, while strobe lights created a disorienting visual environment that made it hard to track time or maintain spatial orientation. "Martinez," Instructor Williams shouted over the noise. "What's your boat crew number?" "Boat Crew 2, Instructor Williams," Sarah replied, her voice hoarse from previous shouting. "Wrong," Williams responded immediately. "You're in Boat Crew 7 now. Why don't you know your own crew assignment?" The contradiction was deliberate, designed to create confusion and test her ability to maintain accurate information under pressure. Sarah realized the instructor was trying to break her mental discipline and responded by focusing on facts she could verify independently. "I am assigned to Boat Crew 2 with crew leader Instructor Williams," she replied firmly. The exchange continued for several more minutes, with Williams attempting various psychological pressure techniques designed to make her doubt her own knowledge and perceptions. Sarah maintained her composure by concentrating on verifiable information and refusing to accept contradictory statements that couldn't be independently confirmed. The psychological warfare phase of Hell Week was designed to identify candidates who could maintain their judgment and decision-making capabilities even when experiencing extreme stress and disorientation. Sarah's analytical background helped her recognize the techniques being employed and develop mental strategies for maintaining accurate thinking under pressure. By the 5th and final day of Hell Week, the accumulated stress and exhaustion had pushed all remaining candidates to their absolute limits. Simple tasks required tremendous concentration, and complex problems seemed almost impossible to solve. However, those who had survived to this point had demonstrated reserves of character and determination that went far beyond normal human capabilities. The final evolution was a comprehensive test that combined elements from all previous training. Boat crews were required to complete a mission that included navigation, combat scenarios, technical problem-solving, and physical challenges that tested every aspect of their preparation and teamwork. Boat Crew 2 approached the final challenge with the confidence born of successful coordination throughout Hell Week. They had learned to function as a single unit, with each member contributing specialized skills while supporting others when needed. Their success would depend on maintaining this coordination despite exhaustion levels that made thinking clearly almost impossible. The mission began with an amphibious assault that required them to navigate through simulated hostile fire while maintaining their tactical formation. Sarah's job was to identify defensive positions and guide the crew to locations where they could establish effective covering fire for the next phase of the operation. Her analysis proved accurate, and the crew successfully completed the assault phase without any members being eliminated from the exercise. However, the mission scenario escalated quickly, requiring them to adapt their tactics and coordinate with other crews while dealing with changing objectives and time pressure. The technical challenges included demolitions calculations, communication equipment setup, and medical scenarios that tested their ability to apply specialized training under extreme stress. Sarah's engineering background proved valuable during the demolitions phase, where precise calculations were required to simulate the destruction of a high-value target. Working with equipment that simulated live explosives, she calculated charge placement and timing sequences while Jake established security, and David prepared communication links with higher command. The coordination required split-second timing and absolute precision, as mistakes could result in mission failure or casualties among friendly forces. Charges set for 45-second delay, Sarah announced as she completed the final connections. All crew members need to be beyond the 200-meter safety perimeter before detonation. The crew executed their withdrawal flawlessly, reaching safe positions with seconds to spare before the simulated explosion marked successful completion of their demolitions objective. Their performance demonstrated the technical competence and tactical coordination that had been the goal of their training throughout Hell Week. However, the mission scenario continued to escalate, testing their ability to maintain performance as exhaustion and stress accumulated. The final phase required them to extract a simulated casualty while under fire, a scenario that demanded both physical strength and tactical sophistication. Had been designated as the casualty, requiring the remaining crew members to move his considerable bulk while navigating obstacles and maintaining defensive posture. Sarah found herself serving as the primary navigator while Jake and David provided covering fire, and Williams handled the physical transport. The extraction route took them through difficult terrain that included water obstacles, climbing challenges, and exposed areas where they would be vulnerable to simulated enemy fire. Sarah's route planning had to balance speed against safety while accounting for the additional difficulty of moving an injured crew member. "Take the high route through the rocks," she directed as they approached a particularly challenging section. "It's longer, but we'll have better cover and more options if we run into problems." The decision proved correct, and Boat Crew 2 successfully completed their extraction without losing any crew members or compromising their tactical position. Their performance throughout the final evolution demonstrated the transformation that had occurred during Hell Week, as 6 individuals had learned to function as a unified special operations team. Hell Week officially ended at sunset on Friday, exactly 120 hours after it had begun with midnight air horns. The surviving candidates stood in formation on the beach where they had suffered through countless evolutions, their faces reflecting a mixture of exhaustion, pride, and disbelief that they had actually completed the legendary ordeal. Chief addressed the survivors with genuine respect in his voice. "Ladies you have just completed the most demanding training evolution in the United States military. You have proven that you possess the physical capabilities, mental toughness, and character necessary to serve in naval special warfare." Sarah looked around at her fellow survivors, noting how the shared experience had forged bonds that went beyond normal military camaraderie. They had seen each other at their worst and best moments, had supported each other through seemingly impossible challenges, and had discovered that human beings were capable of far more than they had previously imagined. However, even as she savored the moment of accomplishment, Sarah understood that Hell Week was just the beginning of her SEAL training. The next phases would test different aspects of their capabilities and continue the transformation that had begun during the previous 5 days. The real test of her readiness for special operations would come during advanced training phases that lay ahead. The celebration was brief, as surviving candidates were given only a weekend of rest before beginning the next phase of their training. Their bodies needed time to recover from Hell Week, but their minds were already focused on the challenges that awaited them in the weeks and months ahead. As Sarah finally allowed herself to rest, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small Texas town to the beaches of. Hell Week had tested every aspect of her preparation and revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. More importantly, it had proven that determination and teamwork could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. But she also knew that the most dangerous challenges still lay ahead, in training phases where mistakes could have consequences far more serious than additional physical exercise or psychological pressure. The path to becoming a Navy SEAL was far from complete, and the real tests of her readiness were yet to come. Navy SEAL Story Part 3. The weeks following Hell Week brought a different kind of intensity to SEAL training. Where the previous phase had tested raw endurance and determination, the advanced training focused on technical skills and tactical applications that would define their effectiveness as special operators. Sarah Martinez found herself immersed in weapons training, advanced combat techniques, and specialized operations that pushed her capabilities in new directions. The surviving candidates had been reorganized into smaller teams as they progressed toward more specialized training phases. Sarah remained with Jake and David, but their crew had been expanded with new members who brought different backgrounds and skills to their unit. The dynamic had evolved from the desperate cooperation of Hell Week into something resembling an actual special operations team. Combat training had become increasingly sophisticated, incorporating scenarios that simulated real-world missions with multiple variables and unpredictable complications. Candidates learned to operate in urban environments, conduct reconnaissance missions, and engage in close-quarters combat situations where split-second decisions could determine the outcome of entire operations. Sarah's small stature, which had required careful management during the physical challenges of earlier training, now emerged as a significant tactical advantage. Her ability to move through confined spaces and remain undetected made her invaluable during reconnaissance missions and urban combat exercises. Instructors began utilizing her unique capabilities in scenarios specifically designed to exploit these strengths. During one particularly complex urban warfare exercise, Sarah found herself assigned to infiltrate a multi-story building and gather intelligence on simulated enemy positions. The scenario required her to navigate through ventilation systems and maintenance passages that would have been impossible for larger operators to access. "Martinez, you'll enter through the utility tunnel on the east side," instructor explained during the mission briefing. "Your job is to map defensive positions and identify high-value targets for the assault team. You'll have 20 minutes to complete reconnaissance and establish communication with the main force." The mission played to Sarah's analytical strengths and physical advantages perfectly. She approached the building through underground passages that connected to the structure's mechanical systems, using blueprints and technical diagrams to navigate complex route that avoided detection by role players serving as hostile forces. Moving through the building's infrastructure required careful attention to noise discipline and spatial awareness. Ventilation shafts provided access to observation positions, but also transmitted sound efficiently throughout the structure. Sarah had to balance the need for comprehensive reconnaissance against the risk of compromising the entire operation through detection. Her technical background proved invaluable as she interpreted building systems and identified vulnerabilities that could be exploited by the assault team. The facility's electrical and HVAC systems provided opportunities for disruption that could give her team significant tactical advantages during their attack. "Overwatch, this is Recon 1, Sarah whispered into her radio from a position above the main target area. "I count 8 hostile positions on the primary floor, with what appears to be a command element in the northeast corner office. Recommend electrical disruption through the main panel in the basement to degrade their communications before assault commencement." Her intelligence proved accurate, and the assault team successfully completed their mission using the information and recommendations she had provided. The exercise demonstrated how her unique combination of technical knowledge and infiltration capabilities could multiply the effectiveness of the entire unit. Advanced weapons training introduced Sarah to systems and techniques that went far beyond basic marksmanship. She learned to engage targets at extended ranges with precision rifle systems, operate crew-served weapons that required coordination with other team members, and employ specialized ammunition types for different tactical scenarios. The transition to precision shooting revealed another area where her analytical approach provided significant advantages. Long-range accuracy required understanding of ballistics, environmental factors, and equipment characteristics that could be calculated and optimized through systematic analysis. Sarah approached marksmanship with the same methodical precision she applied to other technical challenges. She studied wind patterns, calculated bullet drop compensation, and developed firing solutions that accounted for multiple variables affecting shot placement. Her mathematical background allowed her to understand the science behind precision shooting and apply that knowledge practically. "Martinez, you're thinking too much," Instructor Williams observed during a particularly challenging shooting exercise. "Sometimes you need to trust your training and let muscle memory take over." The feedback was accurate. Sarah's tendency to analyze every variable was occasionally counterproductive in situations that required rapid engagement and intuitive shooting. However, her technical approach proved invaluable during complex scenarios that involved moving targets, environmental challenges, or precision requirements that demanded calculated solutions. She learned to balance analytical thinking with instinctive responses, developing the ability to shift between methodical planning and immediate action depending on tactical requirements. The skill would prove crucial during the intense training scenarios that lay ahead. Maritime operations training introduced new dimensions of complexity as candidates learned to operate from submarines, conduct amphibious assaults, and navigate underwater environments while carrying mission-essential equipment. The training took place in both controlled pool environments and open ocean conditions that tested their capabilities under realistic operational stress. Sarah's compact build provided significant advantages during underwater operations. Her lower oxygen consumption and improved hydrodynamic efficiency allowed her to remain submerged longer and move more effectively through aquatic environments. She quickly emerged as one of the most capable maritime operators in her class. Combat swimming exercises required candidates to navigate underwater obstacle courses while carrying full gear and weapons. The challenges simulated operational scenarios where special operators might need to infiltrate coastal targets or conduct reconnaissance in hostile maritime environments. During one particularly demanding exercise, candidates were required to swim underwater for extended distances while solving navigation problems and conducting simulated combat operations. The scenario combined physical challenges with technical requirements that tested multiple aspects of their training simultaneously. Sarah's approach to the exercise reflected her systematic methodology. She calculated optimal swimming speeds to conserve oxygen while maintaining schedule requirements, planned routes that minimized exposure to detection, and developed contingency plans for various complications that might arise during the operation. Her performance was exceptional, completing the exercise faster and more efficiently than most of her classmates while maintaining perfect scores on all technical requirements. The achievement highlighted how her analytical approach could be applied effectively to maritime operations as well as land-based scenarios. However, success in training exercises was about to be tested by a challenge that would push Sarah beyond anything she had previously experienced. Advanced combat training was escalating toward scenarios that closely simulated actual combat operations, complete with realistic stress factors and consequences that went beyond academic exercises. The incident that would define Sarah's SEAL training occurred during a complex multi-phase exercise designed to test candidates' ability to adapt to changing situations while maintaining operational effectiveness. The scenario began as a routine reconnaissance mission, but was designed to escalate into a full combat situation requiring immediate tactical responses. Sarah's team was tasked with infiltrating a simulated enemy compound and gathering intelligence on weapons shipments that were reportedly being staged for transfer to terrorist organizations. The mission required stealth, technical expertise, and careful coordination among team members operating in different roles. The exercise area had been constructed to replicate an actual overseas facility, complete with multiple buildings, defensive positions, and role players who had been trained to respond realistically to various tactical situations. Safety protocols were in place, but the scenarios were designed to be as realistic as possible while maintaining appropriate risk management. Sarah's assignment was to penetrate the facility's computer systems and download intelligence while Jake established security positions and David maintained communication with command elements. The plan required precise timing and coordination, as detection would trigger defensive responses that could compromise the entire mission. The initial phases of the operation proceeded flawlessly. Sarah successfully infiltrated the compound through a route they had planned during extensive reconnaissance, and she reached the target building without being detected by roving patrols or fixed security positions. However, the scenario was designed to introduce complications that would test their ability to adapt and respond to unexpected developments. As Sarah was accessing the computer systems and downloading target intelligence, an unexpected patrol change brought additional security forces into their area of operations. The new patrol pattern threatened to expose Jake's security positions, forcing them to relocate quickly while maintaining overwatch on Sarah's position. The movement required them to cross open terrain where they could be detected, but staying in place would have resulted in certain discovery when the patrol reached their original positions. Made the tactical decision to relocate his team while Sarah completed her mission, calculating that they could reach new positions before being detected if they moved quickly and used available cover effectively. However, the scenario designers had planned for this possibility and had positioned additional role players to create maximum pressure during the movement. The complication that changed everything came during Jake's tactical movement to their new positions. The exercise area included a section designed to simulate damaged infrastructure, with concrete barriers and debris that created realistic urban combat terrain. However, one of the concrete sections had been weakened by previous exercises and environmental factors. As vaulted over what appeared to be a stable barrier, the concrete section collapsed unexpectedly, sending several hundred pounds of debris crashing down on the position where Sarah was attempting to provide covering fire for his movement. The collapse was genuinely unexpected, a true accident that occurred despite extensive safety precautions. Sarah saw the massive concrete slab falling toward her and attempted to dive clear, but the confined space and her position behind cover limited her mobility options. The slab struck her legs with tremendous force, pinning her beneath hundreds of pounds of concrete and steel reinforcement that had broken free from the exercise structure. The impact was devastating. Both of Sarah's legs were crushed beneath the concrete, with multiple compound fractures that were immediately apparent to anyone who could see her position. The pain was beyond anything she had ever experienced, but her first thought was for the mission and her team members who might be in danger if the exercise scenario continued. "Contact, contact," shouted as he realized what had happened. "Real emergency, medical personnel to Grid 47 immediately. We have a candidate down with serious injuries." The exercise halted instantly as instructors and medical personnel responded to the genuine emergency. Within minutes, Sarah's position was surrounded by paramedics and emergency medical technicians who began the delicate process of extracting her from beneath the concrete debris while stabilizing her injuries. The pain was overwhelming, but Sarah maintained consciousness and clarity of thought throughout the rescue operation. Her training had prepared her to function under extreme stress, and she found herself analyzing the situation and providing information to medical personnel even while experiencing trauma that would have incapacitated most people. "Both legs are trapped below the knee," she reported to the senior medic as he established IV access and began administering pain medication. "I can't feel my feet, but I can move my toes on the right side. The concrete is putting pressure on what feels like the fibula on the left leg." Her clinical assessment of her own injuries impressed the medical team and helped them prioritize their treatment efforts. Despite experiencing crushing injuries that threatened her future military career, Sarah was functioning with the analytical precision and situational awareness that had characterized her approach to every challenge during SEAL training. The extraction required careful coordination between medical personnel and heavy equipment operators who could safely remove the concrete debris without causing additional injuries. The process took more than an hour, during which Sarah remained conscious and engaged with the rescue efforts despite pain levels that would have left most people unconscious. "Stay with us, Martinez," the senior paramedic encouraged as they finally freed her legs and began assessing the full extent of her injuries. "You're doing great, but we need to get you to the trauma center immediately." The helicopter flight to the medical facility was a blur of pain medication and medical procedures designed to stabilize her condition during transport. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, but her dominant thought was whether the injuries would end her pursuit of becoming a Navy SEAL. The initial medical assessment was sobering. Both legs had suffered multiple fractures, with damage to bones, muscles, and connective tissues that would require extensive surgical reconstruction. The doctors were honest about the severity of her injuries and the long recovery process that lay ahead. "You're looking at multiple surgeries and at least 12 months of rehabilitation," the orthopedic surgeon explained after reviewing her X-rays and CT scans. "The good news is that we can save both legs and expect full functionality eventually. The bad news is that your military career is probably over." However, the surgeon didn't know Sarah Martinez or understand the determination that had carried her through SEAL training. As she lay in the hospital bed, surrounded by casts and medical equipment, she was already beginning to plan her recovery and return to active duty. The support from her SEAL training classmates was immediate and overwhelming. Jake and David visited daily, providing updates on their continued training while making it clear that they expected her to rejoin them as soon as medically possible. Their confidence in her recovery became a crucial factor in her psychological recovery from the trauma. "The instructors are asking about you constantly," reported during one visit. "Says your spot in the program is waiting for you whenever you're ready to come back." The promise of returning to SEAL training became Sarah's primary motivation during the grueling months of rehabilitation that followed. Physical therapy sessions were excruciating, requiring her to relearn basic movements while gradually rebuilding strength and coordination in her reconstructed legs. However, Sarah approached her rehabilitation with the same analytical methodology she had applied to every other challenge in her life. She studied anatomy and physical therapy techniques, developed optimization strategies for her recovery exercises, and established measurable goals that allowed her to track progress systematically. The process revealed new dimensions of her character that even SEAL training hadn't fully tested. The mental discipline required for long-term recovery was different from the intense but temporary stress of Hell Week or combat exercises. She had to maintain motivation and focus over months of gradual improvement, often dealing with setbacks and frustrations that tested her commitment to returning to active duty. 6 months after the accident, Sarah was walking without assistance and had regained most of her pre-injury mobility. However, the real test would come when she attempted to return to the physical demands of SEAL training. The doctors had cleared her for full duty, but no one knew whether her reconstructed legs could handle the extreme stress of special operations training. Her return was emotional, as instructors and fellow candidates welcomed her back with a mixture of admiration and skepticism about her ability to continue the program. The accident had become legendary within the SEAL community, both for its severity and for Sarah's determination to return from injuries that would have ended most military careers. "Martinez, are you sure you're ready for this?" Chief asked during her reintegration interview. "No one would question your commitment if you decided to pursue a different military specialty." Sarah's response was immediate and definitive. "Chief, I've spent the last 6 months preparing to return to this program. My legs are stronger now than they were before the accident, and I've learned things about mental toughness that I never understood before." Her first physical fitness test would determine whether she could continue with her original training class or would need to restart the program with a new group of candidates. The test included all the standard SEAL requirements: running, swimming, calisthenics, and obstacle courses that demanded full mobility and coordination. Sarah approached the test with careful preparation, having spent weeks conditioning specifically for the SEAL fitness standards. Her legs felt different than before the accident, with areas of residual stiffness and occasional discomfort that required constant attention. However, her overall conditioning was actually better than it had been previously, as months of focused rehabilitation had strengthened her entire body. The running portion of the test was her greatest concern, as the repetitive impact could stress her reconstructed bones and joints in ways that might cause re-injury. However, her careful conditioning and modified technique allowed her to complete the distance requirements within the acceptable time standards. Swimming felt natural and comfortable, as the low-impact environment placed minimal stress on her legs while allowing her to demonstrate the aquatic skills she had developed during previous training. Her times were competitive with other advanced candidates, confirming that her maritime capabilities remained intact. The obstacle course represented the ultimate test of her recovery, requiring her to climb, jump, crawl, and navigate barriers that demanded full confidence in her physical capabilities. Sarah approached each obstacle with careful technique, trusting her rehabilitation and her rebuilt legs to support her throughout the challenging course. She completed the entire physical fitness test successfully, meeting all standards required for continuation in the SEAL program. However, the real validation came from her performance during subsequent training exercises that tested her capabilities under operational stress rather than controlled testing conditions. The advanced combat training that had been interrupted by her accident resumed with scenarios even more challenging than those she had faced previously. Sarah discovered that her experience recovering from serious injuries had actually enhanced her capabilities in unexpected ways. The months of rehabilitation had taught her patience and systematic problem-solving that proved valuable during complex tactical scenarios. Her analytical approach had been refined by the necessity of planning every aspect of her physical recovery, creating mental discipline that enhanced her performance during high-stress operations. Most importantly, the accident had demonstrated to her teammates and instructors that she possessed reserves of determination that went beyond normal human responses to adversity. The respect she had earned during her recovery translated into increased confidence from others in her reliability and commitment during dangerous operations. Her first combat exercise after returning to full duty involved the same type of urban warfare scenario that had led to her accident. The psychological challenge of returning to similar terrain and tactical situations was significant, but Sarah approached it with characteristic analytical preparation and systematic methodology. Remember, we've modified the exercise area to eliminate the structural problems that caused the previous accident, instructor explained during the mission briefing. However, I want everyone to maintain heightened awareness of environmental hazards throughout the operation. Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement of safety concerns, but her focus was on demonstrating that she could perform at the same level as before her injury. The mission required her to infiltrate a defended position and gather intelligence while her team provided security and support. Her performance was flawless, combining the technical skills she had developed during her original training with the enhanced mental discipline that had emerged during her recovery. She completed the reconnaissance mission efficiently and provided tactical intelligence that enabled her team to achieve all their objectives without complications. The success marked a turning point in her return to SEAL training. Fellow candidates and instructors recognized that she had not only recovered from her injuries, but had actually become more capable as a result of the experience. The accident that could have ended her military career had instead revealed depths of character and determination that strengthened her qualifications for special operations. Graduation from SEAL training came 6 months later than originally scheduled, but Sarah Martinez stood with her classmates as they received their Trident pins and formal designation as Navy SEALs. The ceremony was particularly meaningful for her, representing not just completion of the training program but triumph over adversity that had tested every aspect of her character and capabilities. Chief presented her Trident with obvious pride and respect. "Martinez, you've demonstrated that being a Navy SEAL isn't just about physical capabilities. It's about the refusal to accept defeat, the commitment to continuous improvement, and the determination to accomplish the mission regardless of obstacles." The words captured the essence of what Sarah had learned during her journey from small-town Texas to the elite ranks of naval special warfare. Her broken legs had healed stronger than before, but more importantly, the experience had revealed that her greatest weapons were not physical strength or size, but the analytical intelligence and unbreakable determination that had carried her through every challenge. As she looked toward her first operational assignment, Sarah understood that her SEAL training had been preparation for challenges that would test not just her individual capabilities, but her ability to function as part of a team dedicated to missions that would push them beyond normal human limits. The accident had proven that setbacks were temporary, but the qualities that made someone a Navy SEAL were permanent and could overcome any obstacle. Her teammates, Jake and David, graduated alongside her, their bond forged through shared suffering and mutual support that had sustained them through the most demanding training in the military. Together, they represented the culmination of a selection and training process designed to identify individuals capable of operating effectively in the most dangerous and demanding situations imaginable. The ceremony concluded with the traditional challenge that summarized the SEAL philosophy. The only easy day was yesterday. For Sarah Martinez, who had literally rebuilt her legs and her career through determination and systematic effort. The words carried special meaning. Every day brought new challenges and opportunities to prove that excellence was not an accident, but the result of preparation, determination, and the refusal to accept limitations as permanent. Her journey from a small Texas town to the elite ranks of the Navy SEALs had required her to overcome obstacles that went far beyond the standard challenges of military training. The accident that broke both her legs had also revealed that physical limitations were temporary, but the qualities that defined a true special operator were unbreakable and could triumph over any adversity.